Welcome everybody to another talk organized by Scientist Rebellion. I am Fabian and I will be your host for today. For those of you who don't know it, Scientist Rebellion is an international group of scientists and academics from all disciplines who engage in climate advocacy and activism, including civil disobedience. And in terms of today's event, we are very happy to have Mariana Rodrigues and Sinan Eden from Climassimo, a highly effective climate activist group from Portugal, here with us today. They will talk about their extremely timely and provocative new book, All In, a revolutionary theory to stop climate collapse, which I read in January in PDF form, and then the last 2 days also in paperback. And I can highly recommend it. So after Mariana and Sinan's talk, which will last for about 30 minutes, there's ample time for a Q&A, followed by a short talk about what Scientist Rebellion is and is up to. Feel free to ask the questions in the chat box or just unmute yourself later and ask it in person. But without further ado, please, Mariana and Sinan, take it away.
Thanks a lot. So maybe I'll share my screen now or share some slides. So here we are. This is Mariana and me. And this is the book we're going to talk about, All In, a revolutionary theory to stop climate collapse. But before the book, let's talk a little bit about ourselves, I guess, so that people who don't know me, actually, I realize quite some people in the room I know. So I'm Sinan. I am originally from Turkey, but since 2011, I live in Portugal. I have a completely relevant PhD in math for the purposes of this webinar. It's on differential geometry. But what is more interesting is that I have been involved in the student movement in Turkey and other movements, which kind of translates into anti-extreme right movements in Europe, whereas in Turkey, they're typically called like movements against fundamentalism, Islamism, and that kind of stuff. So maybe some sort of democracy movements. Then when I came here, I was also involved in the anti-austerity movement. 2011, you may remember, it was for the southern part of Europe, was a major destructive degrowth policy, top down. And I have been also since 2006, six, I have been involved in climate stuff as well. First time I heard about the climate crisis was in 2007, and since then I didn't recover. I have a strange range of activism or political activity that passes through basic NGOs, big greens, also small NGOs, associations, stuff like that, but also informal collectives, some sort of like DIY spaces and samba bands and so on, but also political parties, a wide range of political parties from big to small, from orthodox to more orthodox. Some of you may have seen my work, as Fabian was mentioning, in true Climassimo stuff. So you may know me from, maybe you've seen me in Climate Justice Action or by 2020 the Rise Up platform or climate jobs campaigns or wherever else, or the Eco-Socialist Encounters and so on. So wide range of, or Legal and Action Conference. And I was actually working, so many of you I know, because I was also involved 6 months very actively with Scientist Rebellion a couple of years ago with the Level With Us campaign that took place. That was a mostly European organized and relatively centralized activities in Germany. So I do action coordination. I did a bit of mobilization stuff. I am a trainer for social movements. I facilitate facilitation. I train facilitation. I'm currently much involved in the legal team. And also most of my work since Turkey has been about international work, international networking, international campaigns and platforms and alliances and so on. Currently, I am doing all of those things on top of my part-time, less than minimum wage job. I work in an office and I do kind of useless work to some extent. So that's me, and I'm going to pass to Mariana to for her to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mariana. I'm based in Lisbon, in Portugal. I'm from Portugal, also in that sense. I'm 29 years old, and I actually also study mathematics and computation. Although I use it, and I have been using in the last 10 years for tutoring kids, like to give preparations for exams and for like helping them in schools. So in mathematics and physics. So usually that's my work. And since I entered in university, that I have been involved in the student movement back then. So that was my first work in terms of like organization and understanding different social problems. And from that, I started to work a lot around social justice in really different kinds of organizations. I was jumping from one organization to another in Portugal, trying to find a place that could make sense for me. And I was from like grassroots organizations to really institutional ones. For example, I was working and doing activism in International Amnesty in Portugal and represented during 2 years International Amnesty at European level in a global platform of like youth platform. So doing a lot of work on that sense.
Mariana, so
Yeah.
just quickly, there's a slight problem with your microphone. It clips a little bit and the sound is not super good. If you could fix it quickly, otherwise, maybe a little bit later when you're done introducing yourself.
Is it better now?
I think so. Maybe continue a little bit and then we reassess. Thanks.
All right. So as I was saying, I was doing a lot of this work in terms of like social justice. And back then there was a fight in Portugal, so in 2019, against the gas and oil exploration projects. And I joined one of the climate camps around that. That's where I knew Sinan from. And I started working against the gas exploration in Portugal. And that has been one of the main work that I have been doing actually. So like we won that fight, but then like I have been working a lot around stopping fossil fuels, in particular around gas. But not only, that was in 2019 also with the boom of XR and Fridays for Future that I joined Climaximo and I started doing climate justice activism. And was on that time that I also did start doing a lot of international work. I have been part of the core team of by 2020 Rise Up. That was a European platform for escalation and coordination of the climate justice movement. I was one of the main drivers of Glasgow Agreement. That was a space for the social movement and the climate justice movement to stop requesting to the institutions to stop climate crisis and actually have and build a plan to do it. And later I have been organizing around, or like I was one of the organizers of the Earth Social Conference, that was one of the main conference of like the climate justice movement in the last years. So yeah, I think that I still have some problems with my mic from what I understanding from the chat. So maybe Sinan, could you pick up the next slides and then I will see how to move forward.
Sure. So let's actually talk about what we said we were going to talk about, so which is the book. And basically, I want to we're going to say three things. We're going to say why this book exists, what is in the book, and how to go all in, basically, what to do afterwards, right? So that's kind of the framework, which is, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we are coming from, like what is feeding into this necessity of writing a book. And I think the core point that we want to say is the understanding that we have two sets of information at hand. And by we, I don't know exactly what I mean. And this is a major problem in the book, as you will notice, that sometimes the we is just me and Mariana. Other times it's all organizers. Otherwise, it's our progressive political organizations. Otherwise, sometimes it's even larger groups and so on. But anyway, so we have two sets of information. One of them is the climate crisis, climate emergency, which is that a major change has to happen, and we need that to happen very, very quickly, right? And then we can talk about like very specific deadlines of very specific measures and so on. But so one information is about urgency. The other set of which is really on its own, is already like anxiety driving kind of, very hard to hold. It's brand new information. It's like one could say that our species is not prepared, cognitively prepared for that, to digest that kind of information. And then the second set of information is that it's structural, by which I mean that there is a socioeconomic system, let's name it capitalism, that is the driving force behind a bunch of things that we need to solve. So when I said like we need major transformative changes, I mean that we have to address capitalism. So there's this whole, and by capitalism I mean the very basic private property of means of production, class society between, capitalists and the rest of us who need to work and so on. So that's like very basic, but that is what needs to change, right? So, and that is on its own, when you talk about things like that, that is already very heavy. And our understanding is more and more people are aware of this two sets of information, and it's very hard to hold both of them, because it's already very hard to hold one of them, right? The emergency part, the urgency deadline part, and the very basic, like, okay, what is to be changed is basically everything, right? So our understanding is that we need an adequate theory of change that can address both of these, so can give us a way of looking at this problem and actually executing that change that is necessary through an organizational model, right? So the task being dismantling capitalism in the short term. How are we going to achieve that? And how are we going to achieve that? How is that supposed to happen? Theory of change. And what is the mechanism through which we can make that happen, which is the organizational model. So this is what the book is about. Yeah, so this is what the book is about. And this is where we are coming from. This is the question that we wanted to answer, because we thought this was the question that a lot of people, a lot of organizers, a lot of groups, a lot of activists, a lot of people that are engaged in either sides of this sets of information we're looking at. So the book itself is short. As you can notice, I took a very strange screenshot of the content list. So it's a short book and we say that it's an easy read, by which we mean like you can actually start and finish in a couple of days, which is not to say that it's simple. It deals with very complex ideas that we learned from other groups and other spaces. And it also doesn't mean that it is easy to digest necessarily. So we also think it's a tough read. And the way it's organized is that we spent just one third of the book by giving status updates, like where are we, what's going on. So anchoring ourselves, sobering up, taking stock, that kind of stuff. Then one third of it is the main argument. So it's just really just 50 pages of like making a lot of reference to a lot of places as well, a lot of the literature in terms of social movements and so on. But like the main proposal is in the middle of the book, and the rest of it is how to move forward, what to do, right? It's like a to-do list. And you can notice if you look at it that like the last chapter is the longest chapter. The last section is the longest section, which is called implementation and so on. So it's actually a very practical book from an organizer's perspective, right? It's a very practical book. And the way it's organized is that it's organized into 6 propositions. The first 2 propositions being that we have a global business, so we have a global issue at hand and a global way of addressing it. We have a class business, so there is class struggle to solve and to address, and the way to work on it is through class. And then the rest, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and the 6th are basically responding to complexity with complexity, right? So when we look at, well, global stuff, class stuff, deadlines, system change, and all of that, like this is a lot to ask from any one of us. And typically when we think of that kind of change, we're like, this is going to be very, very complex. And when we say that, we tend to say it in a defensive way, saying it's too complex, and not as in that is the level of complexity that we have to provide for ourselves. So we look at a framework that was designed by others, people that are more intelligent than us, called the ecology of social movements. So looking at the social movement as an ecosystem, we embed intentionality into it. So it's not exactly what you may have heard elsewhere about, like, yeah, ecologies, roles, and so on. We have a critical reading, let's say, or a critical contribution to that conversation, where we look at change driven through diverse yet united entity, right? So that is the responding to complexity with complexity. So this is more or less how it is organized. And we wanted to think about how we can give you a little bit of like appetizers, give you a taste of the book without giving a lot of spoilers of the book. So one way we came up with is that we found like 3 places where we are saying interesting things, but they're not really spoiling the rest of the book for you. So we're gonna just share some of them with you now. And Mariana, would you like to test one of them? Would you like to try and test this one? In terms of your sound, I mean.
Yeah, sure. Let's try it. Let me know how it is. Is it okay?
So far, so good. Yes.
Haha. Okay. Thank you for it. All right. Yeah, good. So one of the things that actually most, or like I have come across in my work on international, so like international level, especially focusing on the global north, so like US, Europe, and so on, is that we are trying to find, we are waiting for the perfect person, right? Like some kind of like a hero, or even like somebody that is, like that has to do, that is able to do everything, and that we don't see ourselves as that person, right? So I think that's a way for us to separate somehow from that responsibility, but also it's about like the ambition that in general is missing in the movements, and how we perceive ourselves and the power that each of us have. I had the luck to be with Fabian in some days ago physically, and I was saying that he has, we were talking to each other, and we were saying like, like each of us can be Emilcar Cabral, or can be Shea, or can be, like there is no reason for that not to happen, and we need to see ourselves as, like has that, and be able to understand, okay, we have to call, and we have to provoke and organize and actually execute system change, and we cannot wait for another person to be doing that. It will be us doing that, and it has to be while we are alive. And we're not saying this as it's like, oh, this is a simple thing to do. It's actually very frightening and overwhelming emotion that we have around this, but it's something that we have to face it, and we have somehow to hold that. So that's one of our, challenges for you, let's say like this. And if you want, Sinan, I can do the rest, the second one. Yeah. So other thing that usually we hear, and I'm saying this has something like, I'm talking about others, I'm also talking about myself, right? A lot of times while we are doing actions, we're organizing ourselves, we are in a conference and so on, we have this idea that, okay, we are doing our part, and this is what we are able to do. But the question that we have is like, okay, but part of what actually? Like you're doing your part, but what is that your part of what exactly? And that is one of the biggest issues, is that we don't know how to answer that, right? And when you don't know how to answer that, it means that we're actually part of the liberalism, the capitalism system in that sense, or like the part of the problem somehow, not problem the problem, but we are just doing something to feel good and not have like a strategic or more approach. And I guess like the challenge that we all of us face, and also myself, is how can we know exactly what we are part of and have this plan that we build together in order to dismantle capitalism in short term. So to actually have that, like knowing, okay, I'm part of this and I'm doing this part because others are doing the other parts, and I understand what is happening. So basically, we need to have the big picture. And that means that we need to think at movement level strategy. So when I'm saying this is that the strategy that we have and the strategy that we are thinking are not only the strategy of our own organization, but also thinking, or what is the strategy at a movement level. So the different organizations that are present, what is the strategy that we have with all the diversities that comes from it, but why is it, how they like connect with each other, and why my part makes sense, and what are the other parts that are existing, and how that in the end builds power and enable us to win and stop climate catastrophe. So this also means that we need actually to have a mandate in our organizations for decision making at a global level, and allocated resources for that. So that's one of other things that we explore a little bit on the book, is how can we, overcome this idea of like, okay, I'm doing my part, but what does that actually mean, and how we can, have a bigger and coordination plan between ourselves. And the last sneak peek that we want to give to you is that, well, actually this book is a recruitment tool. So we are like, I'm not sure if actually Sinan already said that, but we are not writers. We have write this book, but we are mainly organizers, and we understand that we have to organize ourselves, and all of us have to organize with each other in order to do what is necessary. So we currently, to do that, and maybe picking up a little bit what I was saying, that we need to see ourselves as Che or as Emilio Cabral, is one of the things that I say with this, is that we need to think on victory terms. So how are we able, to actually think, okay, we have to stop climate collapse while we are alive. This is not something for other person to do. It's not something for like our grandchildren to do. So how can we step up for this task? And actually, and now enable us to explore this and thinking on these terms. So yeah, so this is a little bit some of the sneak peeks that we want to give of like the ways that we are thinking on this book, and the ways that we are talking and exploring the current situation that we are. And Sinan, I don't know if you want to add something.
So I'd like to add then so this is what is in the book. So, and then how to do these things, right? The last sneak peek was, so there are 3 steps, right? To step up means there's a current state, there's a future state, and there's a step towards that step. So how to do that? I wanted to give you a few ideas of like what's going on. So the book exists, as Fabian was showing. Let me also show you. It's a printed copy. There's also an ebook available in all of this in English. But besides that, so this is again a recruitment tool, which means that book is not a standalone object, right? It comes with all these webinars and sessions that we're doing. There's a website. In the website, we're actually writing down a 6th chapter to the book with very concrete examples of tools for organizers that other more intelligent people have produced about organization, about strategy, about communication, about security, and for social movements and so on. So there's an entire chapter of like hands-on what exactly one can do. But there's also a series of other articles that other authors are writing we're also writing, called All in Applied. So cases in which the ideas, the main ideas in the book were applied or being applied or could be applied. So people are doing some sort of speculative writing. They're also writing about past experience. They're also writing about what's happening now and so on. So together with that, we are holding a lot of events. Some of them are real life events. Others are online, like this one. There are quite a few reviews and interviews coming up in different languages in different places. So we're doing these presentations and webinars, and we are slowly building up for trainings and workshops that take as departure points what the main ideas are in the book, but it's for actually, dismantling capitalism in the short term, which kind of one could discuss this issue without referring to the book anyway. So kind of moving forward in that way. So just to say, if you want to know about any of these upcoming events, recent articles, and so on, the best way to keep in touch with us is by following the newsletter in all-in.now, but also you can just send us an email. So this is my very final slide where we have, now I will make mistakes, right? So we are in Instagram, Mastodon, Blue Sky, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and there's also an email. So in whichever form you want to reach us out to discuss how we want to move forward, these are some of the ways that you can contact us. I think this is where we will stop so that people have time to, ask questions, make comments. I'll pass back to Fabian, I guess. Right?
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Sinan and Mariana. So let's move into the Q&A. So maybe I'll help guide us through a little bit, since I've read the book and I'm not sure how clear the actual content was to the people attending. Let's start with the first question somebody asked in the chat, which you've partly addressed at the beginning. But first is, so what do you understand by capitalism, and what do you mean when you talk about dismantling it? How do you envision the system afterwards to look like? And then specifically, this question is also about the private sector. To what extent do you think the private sector plays a role after system change?
Yeah, I mean, our definition does not really, you can complexify it, but we are using the very basic private property of means of production. That is, there is a logical line, there's an analytical and logical line, set aside the historical line, that proves that if you start with a world of commodities, you reach the climate crisis more or less. So this, we take it as given, which means, so there's a beginning of the book. The book is very short exactly because it doesn't cover a bunch of stuff. So we say things like, there is a bit of like connection between capitalism and climate, and there are beautiful books, much better than anything that we could possibly write, and we give some examples of those. So The Enemy of Nature by Joel Covell is a good one. And Fossil Capital by Andreas Malm is another one. And This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein is another one. So we're just saying we are not going to repeat what is there because it's already there and it's very well written. And so we just move from there onwards. So basically, we are using the simple assumption, like the simple definition, which then you can think more about, like, what does it mean in terms of markets, in terms of production, in terms of distribution, and so on. But like, we are keeping the core essence of capitalism in this classical definition. And in terms of future, you asked another question. So this was in the chat, right? And there's another question. So there's this question about, like, what is the vision? One could say something like free association of direct producers and so on, which doesn't mean anything on its own. It's really because it's a vision. It's not supposed to, be very visual, even though it's a vision. I think the main point that we all feel is that when you're in a truck going down the slope backwards, right? Something went wrong, and somehow you're going backwards toward, like, down the hill. if you know how to drive, you know that the right thing to do at that point, and if like there's a cliff that you're gonna fall. So imagine in that scenario of crisis, right? This is an actual crisis scenario. In that scenario, there are a series of things that you have to do. You have to brake for a very long time, and then use the handbrake. And you may also, and then you may want to control with the gears, right? So the question of, but where are we going to go afterwards, is an interesting question. But if you are at the situation of the climate of this crisis, if somebody comes and says, but you want to pull the handbrake, but actually, where are we going to go afterwards? I think that's the conversation that we will have to have together. That will be part of the dismantlement, right? Because somebody's pulling us back. First, we have to stop them, but we also have to stop the structure that is doing that, and then we will have to discuss where we want to go forward. I think we know that we don't want to go backward at this point, right? So there's this, and I really like this kind of reference to going backwards, because we really try. One of the things that we are doing throughout the book is that we try to recover a sense of progressiveness for us as well, like looking at something being progress, something that we want to go towards, like avante, going forward somehow, right? We want to recover that sense because we think that is an essential part for any kind of transformative movement, social movement at this point. So I would not really. I think it's a major statement to say we want to abolish private property of means of production in terms of like visionary, but that I'm also fully aware that doesn't explain anything about resource allocation or decision making and so on, which can perfectly. There are so many good ideas around in the air, and we can pick and test and experiment, and we don't even have to have one single answer to that, right?
Yeah.
So this is neat.
No, that makes sense. Thank you, and I appreciate this practical element, of the handbrake, rather than envisioning in the armchair what the future will hold and so on. Although there should be space for this as well. Now, there was one question on theory of change. So let me take this up, because in the book, actually, I don't know whether people can see this. They draw, I think, 14 theories of change in total of past struggles, from the Jacobins to guerrilla warfare and so on and so forth. So if people are really interested in theories of change, I think this is the book for you. But you also, at the end, you have these, which you didn't show us, which I'm a bit saddened by. You have these beautiful graphs where you draw the movement ecology and so on. So maybe based on the question, can you talk a little bit about the theory of change that you're proposing here, in terms of the movement ecology and the different grand strategies, and how you envision this a bit more concretely, to answer this question on theories of change, because you do something clever here, right? You say, no, this is not this one theory of change, right? But we have to have multiple approaches and bet on different horses, and then see what reality brings. It would be great if you could explain this a little bit more for the audience.
Yeah, sure. And thank you also for making that question. So I think, like, for first, one thing that I wanted to really stress, highlight, is that, like, there is really different definitions of what theory of change means, right? But I just wanted to focus on, like, the importance and the problem that we are having nowadays in our movement, that is the lack of a theory of change that allow us to actually execute the thing that we are considering that is necessary. So we have been saying we need to dismantle capitalism, or even if it's not saying that, we are saying at least system change, not climate change. But the whole theory of change that we have even in their diversity are not allowing us to actually, doesn't give a clear path of like, okay, we do this and do that, or like we have these different steps, and this will allow us to achieve this point of actually dismantle capitalism while we are alive, or in our generation, in that sense. And that lack of theory of change is making us feel depressed, is making us feel burnout, is making us feel frustrated. So this is really important point in that sense. And as Fabienne said it really well, and thank you also for being giving some sneak peeks of the book. We do one of the things that we really wanted to start with the book was to explain the different theory of change that other movements that have won in the past, some like that have had a revolutionary approach, have done it, and how we need that. So when I'm saying we need to think on like has a Shea or has a Milka Cabral, it's not just like the ambition that we have, but also having this kind of like really clear idea of how do we go from where we are to the place that we want to go, and knowing that, right? So the book is about like what is that theory of change and how can we organize around that, right? And maybe one of the reasons why Sinan did not enter too much on it is because to explain that is basically I will have to explain the whole book somehow, like the whole argument. But maybe let me try to just give you some some things to pick you, and then you can, of course, and I invite you to read it to deeper understand it. So we are based. We decided to base our work and the book in different analyses that already exist and different tools that already exist also. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? So we are more like picking up these and using them and adapting them to our context. So one of the things is like there is three main transformative strategies. So how do you, how do you perceive that the change is going to happen in society? And that can be, you think that it's going to happen inside of the institution, so you are able to change institutions by inside. You can think that the way that you're going to do it is on the cracks of the system, so you're able to build resistance on the cracks of the system and bloom them in different places, and this will change the system by itself. And there is the third one, that is the ruptural one, that is saying that you need to confront the status quo, you need to confront the state in order to overcome it and overrule it. And that's the way to execute system change. So it really depends, like there is this tree, and what we are saying is that due to the urgency that we have and the fact that capitalism is working at a global level, the only one that is able to answer to this is this more ruptural and confrontative way of approaching. But then inside of this, there are really different grand strategies. There is different strategies that we need to have, because there are different opportunities, that are different things that are happening in society that we need to focus on. There are also different capabilities that we need to have. So for one hand, we do give we do propose what is the theory of change that we understand that is the one that is able to, to execute, to dismantle system change in the short term, but also allowing for a lot of diversity inside of it. And I guess, I don't know, Sinan, if you want to add something of this, without, entering in the whole book again, but this is just to give you some sneak peeks on that. And yeah, so if you are, as Fabienne said, if you are looking for this theory of change, or not for the one, right? And once again, it's not we should not look for a messiahs, and also we should not look for a Bible in that sense, right? The one answer. But if you're looking for, how can we move from where we are to where we want to go, and actually have that understanding, then I will much invite you to read the book. Yeah. Sinan, do you want to add something on this?
Yeah, I can say a few things. So we use this, as Mariana was saying, we use this ecology of social movements perspective as responding to complexity with complexity. But we use ecology as method of scientific analysis, right? We're not using it as self-affirming romanticism. So when you look at any kind of ecosystem, there's diversity to be avoided, right? There's certain elements that you don't want, certain clusters that you don't want. They are not productive for maintaining the ecosystem or leading it to wherever it wants to go. So we look at diversity that needs to be avoided. We are looking at diversity that needs to be tolerated. So by this we mean somebody has this idea that we should look at them. We should look at a specific group and mobilize that group, because that will be key to, you know, making an explosion of social mobilizations and so on. I might I might not agree with that, but I understand the logic, and I'll just let them do that, right? Because they may be right. We don't know. I think I have a different bet maybe, and I'm moving towards that bet, like in my organization and my cluster of organizations. So that would be tolerating. But there's also diversity to harvest. So if any organization is giving political training or even action training, it's good for all of the other organizations around it, right? Or if somebody is holding the narrative in a way that is like aiming at system change, all other groups are benefiting. So there's a bit of harvesting also. So looking at diversity in a very intentional way. And I think that is the main. So there's one question about like what's new in this. There are so many organizations defending so many different things. What the novelty in the book is really to be simultaneously fine and annoyed with mutually exclusive strategies. So this is what I think this is new. So we are celebrating throughout the book that a bunch of organizations and revolutionaries in the last 200 years, they have been right, and they succeeded whatever they wanted to achieve, a major social change, they achieved it. But if you look at each one of them, they are mutually exclusive, they are antagonistic to each other, but they were responding to different contexts, right? And they had a different bet. So different things can work at the same time. So we have to understand how we can.
Apologies for this terrible incident. But I think we can continue. Sinan, do you wanna just take it up again?
Yeah, I think so. Basically, what I was saying is that we live in a different context. And that different context is not just that we want to, you know, that because the climate change, climate crisis, global issues, all issues are global at this point and so on. But also like the actual state apparatus that we're dealing with is globalized. So that means we are really looking at very different contexts to work with, right? So, and it's important to understand that we need to organize at that level, even though we are talking about simultaneously, we are talking about privatizations that are happening in Turkey, peasants committing suicide in India, cost of living and housing crisis in Europe, and like extractivist plans in Latin America, and all the groups that are like groups and populations, like communities that are organizing around these things and mobilizing around these things to understand like how can we make sense of all of these things at the same time. And of course, when you ask a question like this to yourself, it's kind of a question of like somebody comes and says, you have to build a house to me. And I'm like, okay. I mean, the answer cannot be, okay, I'll just make a to-do list and I'll do all of it, right? What you do is you build a team around you, and each one of you is doing something else. Sometimes you have to do things in order, other times not really, but you can't just say, and if you have a deadline, right, then you really need that kind of harvesting that diversity, but at the same time, like gathering a group of people that will be doing completely different things. And by completely different, I really mean some of you will be building the house, another maybe will be doing sanitation work, another will be doing, will be somewhere else finding other material and so on, like literally in different parts, using different kind of organizational cultures, using different kind of strategies to get what we need. But we still have to articulate, and we have to have a common intention or a common direction. So we need to also build that direction among us. But that doesn't mean we have to be like have this monolithic way of like we will all simultaneously do the exact same task and then we will move to a different task and so on. So understanding ecology in that way, like what are the functions and in the interventions each organization and even each alliance of organizations are bringing into the room, right? Yeah, so this is what I wanted to share, I guess, in terms of like what is new here, because I think we are answering an actual question that is in a lot of people's minds. And because we are feeling uncomfortable with simplified answers, because we understand that, I mean, simplified answers are good, but they are typically not long-reaching in terms of what they can achieve, right? So, and if you want to reach further, we're like, well, but these tools themselves, these ways of thinking themselves, and by this, I mean, like any organization that I am part of, I have been part of, they are also limited. And like recognizing that as well, saying each organization will do something, but we have, as this was what Mariana was saying, right? That we need to be part of something and we need to build that whole and then be part of it at the same time. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to share.
Thanks, Sinan. On this, I do think, I mean, one of the big contributions of this book is indeed to shift the focus a little bit from kind of from the level of the single organization to the level of the movement, right? And this coordination work. And you say in the book that a quarter of any organization's work, needs to be dedicated to international organization. Actually, 3/4 of kind of main strategy alignment would have to come from this international coordination space. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how exactly do you envision this happening, and what concrete steps can we do, and are you doing to accomplish this? And maybe can you give an example to have this be a little bit more plastic, if you want? Give an example how national or a local struggle would be informed by international strategy, and how would it be different? So, for example, in the Netherlands, there's a lot against fossil fuel subsidies, right? And there's, let's say, in Germany is doing their thing, and there's Just Stop Oil in the UK. So how would they align at this international level? So maybe you can talk a little bit more in practical terms and give an example.
Yeah, I think I'll open this because Mariana can finalize, like give a final answer. So I think we have been doing, Mariana and myself also have been doing a lot of international work. And one of the things, so when we say like you have to invest a lot of your organizational work into international stuff, most of it is really just being aware of what exists, right? What are the main bets that other groups are doing? Where are other groups looking at the international level? What is being tested? What is lessons learned at this point by, a recent experiment that some group did? First, that kind of stuff. So that's just circulating information and understanding how much of it is relevant. And the second of all, so we look at like some sort of translocal, but also topical, right? Like you have to understand why other movements are doing what they're doing. What are they trying, and what we can learn? Like if you have a specific thematic group, which you may or may not have, but if you have, you may want to learn from other topical based organizations and movements to understand like what they tested, what worked, and how is that relevant, and so on. So there's a lot of very basic awareness around because one of the important things of ecology is really just being aware of like what is influencing, what is happening, who is thinking what, why are they doing what they're doing, and so on. And then also invest time in actually talking with these groups, understanding what they're saying, learning, bringing it back to your organization. So one of the things that we propose that groups do is really spend a lot of time just discussing and sharing other people's ideas, right? And just giving them credit for testing that particular thing, right? And this is from like very simple, what is going on with Stop EACOP? What is the actual alliance? Who is making the decisions? How is this working? Like, what are the points of intervention? To like, what is Letzte Generation testing? What is XR Netherlands testing? How is that working? How is that relevant for me? Is it ever relevant? Maybe it isn't, but like understanding what is happening there and so on. And also like going further, looking at the mass mobilization in Argentina for like, it's been months that they are mobilizing, looking at Romania, mass mobilizations. In Serbia, they didn't stop for months now. They literally, there are mobilizations every day. What is going on? What is mobilizing people? Because when you look at like system change as the final objective, all of these things become very relevant, right? They become part of the same sample, let's say, that you want to look at. So I think one very important, and this is not the practical part, but this is like the basis for everything else, is to pay attention, I guess. Pay attention to beyond our, let's say, bubbles, but these are analytical bubbles, bubbles of class, bubbles of topic, bubbles of country or some city or whatever, like getting out of that and see what else we can learn. This is also why we have that whole chapter of like 14 examples of different theories of change of different groups, what were they saying and so on, and like be curious about all of that and not repeat the same mistake, right? Make new mistakes. So this is what I'm going to say, and then Mariana will tell you probably stuff much more concrete, let's say.
Okay, so the first thing, so nothing that we are saying is like dogmatic, or we are saying this because we think this is the truth, right? So it's coming from a place of, okay, how can we have a strategy, or like how is your strategy lead us to the system changed, like to dismantle capitalism in the short term, right? And this is a conversation that I had with so many groups. That is, okay, you have that strategy, good. How what it means, like if you win, if you're able to execute exactly what you're betting or trying to do, does this lead us closer, or does this makes us being able to dismantle capitalism in the short term? And I think like this is the question that we are making over and over and over again, right? And the reason why we are saying that we need to put much more, like capability and resources on the global coordination and global mandate and stuff like that, is because nowadays the attacks that are being that we are suffering, so the attacks that are being done to people, to all living beings, are being done at a global level. So this is something that we are not looking on this sense. Especially the climate justice movement has been done a lot of like articulation at a global level. We have been trying to connect with each other and so on, but usually our strategies is based on the national level strategy, right? We are not thinking of like the global level strategy in that sense. And the problem is that the decisions, the power, the way that things are being done, it's not anymore at a national level, at a state level. It's actually happening, like at a global level. And to simplify it, we can think about EMF, you can think about the World Bank, you can think, you can think about G7, G20. So all of these, these are the places where decisions are being made. These are the places that, that are where things are being done. So in those terms, if you ask me, and you're saying, right, Fabian, how do we look to the local struggles, right? I think in the end, it's the same thing. Should we, there is this local struggle. How should we engage with it? Should we put all of our resources there or not? The answer for it will be how doing that, how doing that will allow us to be closer to execute system change in short time. If so, you should. If not, maybe we should do something different. And to understand that, to understand if yes or no, you need to first understand a global analysis of what is happening politically and socially. So for that is a little bit what Sinan was telling, like understand, like knowing what is happening in different places, understanding how things connect and so on. But you also need to check your own strategy at a global level and building, this is a little bit about the part of what I'm doing is part of what, what is the global plan in that sense. But also, if what I'm doing at a local, national, wherever, regional level, allow us to build a movement and build power enough to make a change, and have an impact and how does it, how does that happen? So I think like you need to have that check, and the only way for us to actually be able to have that check is to talk with somebody that is not from there and can, and can understand that better. So yeah, so this is why we are saying this kind of like resource allocations and mandate building. And to give some specific examples, you can look like when there was the Vietnam War, and the whole fight for the anti-imperialism of the US, so the movement against US imperialism, that used this one situation and a very concrete situation to build a whole global movement. And we had like a peace movement, an a movement against chemical weapons, a global anti-imperialist movement, like with a specific fight. So like maybe it can be like that, or even, for example, sometimes it looks like the how it was with the in several situations where an organization and several organizations needed to change their strategy to execute the strategy from other organization. For example, to allocate resources to go to the Spanish Civil War, or to go to Nicaragua Revolution, or to go to Rojava, like, so there is this also, like, this is another way for you to look at it, right? Like, you actually have to take part of your capability to send to execute the strategy over the organization, because you understand that winning that will allow us to have a much more, like, be much more closer to dismantle, to have a win altogether, let's say, like this. And you can think about other ways of also, like, other examples. And I think, like, this is the kind of thinking that we need to have, right? Yeah, so maybe I hope that was enough clear, and I wanted to also hear other questions, so I will leave it back here, but if you want more, I can I can keep talking.
Thank you. Yeah, I have 1,000 questions, but there's another one in the chat that I wanted to platform, where the person says, how do you differentiate yourselves from the UK Revolutionary Communist Party, or of, I'm not sure, the international Marxist tendency? I'm interested in your acceptance of those groups with the same theory of change, whether you can work together even if they don't have the same strategy. Is that question clear? I guess the question hints at the fact that there are, in the kind of the communist world and struggles, the international, like, ideas of building this international space to coordinate the struggles, and how you relate to that.
So I don't know. I'm aware of 2 revolutionary communist parties that were organized in Great Britain, but the ones I know don't exist anymore. So I don't know which one this question is referring to. I'm aware of the international Marxist tendency. What we are suggesting, I think, in the book is that various groups are investing in some specific grand strategy and a specific way of organizing, because they see change happening through a specific way, which is historically tested, and it worked in many cases, and in majority cases it didn't work, because anything that you test in politics is in majority of cases it doesn't work anyway. So that's not the point, right? To understand where that kind of grand strategy would fit in an image, because basically what we're saying is there are very little examples of replicated grand strategy that worked. Very little. Maybe, like, to some extent, some Pan-African anti-colonial movements could be considered replicas from each other, like actually just copy paste and then it works. But, like, otherwise, elsewhere, typically somebody says this is how to do it, and somebody else picks it and does something completely different, because that fits better for the context. So I think understanding this complexity in the context we are operating, and be simultaneously very convicted to a specific way of doing, and at the same time having mental contingencies in mind, saying, well, actually, I really believe this will work, But I understand that this other thing could also work, because in history it did work. In history, a lot of people had a lot of convictions and other things that worked as well. So I think this is the kind of position that we're suggesting, not really. So I'm kind of avoiding the question of like, what do you think about this or that? Because that's not really what we are trying to do here. We're not really referring to any organization throughout the book, except if you want to give a very concrete, like, working example of this group is now like, is a good example of this capability or this strategy and so on. So I think the answer that we are giving is to understand how they fit into the bigger picture of different organizations and different networks of organization.
And maybe if I can add, it's not to answer directly, but I do think there is something that is very curious. So in the whole work that I have been doing at the international level, I have come up, like, usually organizations are somehow in one of the two situations, that either they do understand and are really focused on executing system change, but they don't think that they will do it in their lifetimes. Like, they usually have plans for, like, like that grandchildren eventually will do it, And in my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, but these kind of organizations that you are asking are more on this, like in this side of, like, organizations that may have this understanding of, like, system change and so on and so on, and that's really deep on it, but they don't think that they will do it in their lifetimes, right? Or they are not strategizing on that sense, at least most of the times. And on the other hand, we have a lot of groups that have the urgency, has something that is really present, but can be a little bit maybe missing this part of, like, how actually, how actually we are able to do that. And something that I have noticed a lot is, like, for example, and I'm saying this because we are now in the, I'm guessing that most of the people that are here are connected with Science Rebellion, or at least have this urgency really clear for them, right? So that's not something that when we are saying that we need to do in short term, that's not something that makes you wonder. It's something that has something that is almost certain, like, in that sense. So it's the other part that that is, making you wonder about that, right? And usually when I'm talking with these groups that you are saying, they will say, oh, you actually are, like, like, what is the difference from you, from XR, or from Scientist Rebellion, or from, like, because from them what they are hearing is this urgency part that they are not, like, they are not holding. So, and we are not saying that to just hold one of them, or we're not saying that to think on this organizational level terms of strategy. We are actually saying we need to hold both of these, realities, and we need to have a much more general global plan of that allows different strategies and so on. So this is what Sinan also tells you. But I think this is part that I'm trying to point out is a really emotional part, right? Because it's really, really difficult for us to hold this both complex situations at the same time, to hold both the level of urgency and the level of change that is necessary. So this is what we are, like, inviting us to have the boldness to do, and knowing how hard it is. So yeah, and I think in that sense, like, that level of honesty is something that we need to build between ourselves, and that's still necessary to build, let's say, like this.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's really good the way you stress the urgency in the book, but then actually combine it with being ambitious, on the level that is necessary to, as you say, stop climate collapse. I want to end with one almost philosophical question that was asked before we got Zoom bombed, and kindly the person posted again. The person says, in Seeing Like a State, James Scott argues that virtually every statist society has been based on commodification of the earth, and thus ecological destruction. What are your thoughts on this? Do we just need to dismantle capitalism, quote unquote, just, or is the problem deeper than that?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess, like, I don't know, because so I would say commodity as a general form is connected to capitalism. So I wouldn't define, I don't think I wouldn't understand what is the analytical definition of a commodity before, let's say, 14th, 15th centuries. Like, that's not a generalized form of like talking about things. Now, having said that, putting that aside, that could be adjusted in the formulation of the question, right? I would consider state as always connected as a manifestation of class society. We treat state as collective dominant class. So capitalist state is the collective capitalist class. The state is itself the manifestation of class dominance. So this is the basic, like this is not our invention. Like this is really old-fashioned analysis, like quite stable theory. So, of course, class society is not the same as capitalism, and I understand that, right? Class society has a longer history and a more complex history than capitalism today has had with globalization and so on. So, but there is this underlying intuition of capitalism as the final class society because it produces classes, right? And so basically the idea of like it produces a universal class, right? These are really standard political theory. It has nothing to like, we are not inventing any of this, but there's this this is one of the sets of information about capitalism, right? That the specific class interests of the working class are universal because they are not specific, because they are directly addressed at the private property of means of production. So understanding this emancipatory vision as end of capitalism equals end of class society, right? So there's this underlying theory in the book. We're not referring to that because that's very well written. It's more than 100 years of literature around that. So, but I would say that's kind of my answer. So dismantling capitalism itself, I think, will result in something deeper because of structural connectedness with class societies in general and how state manifests itself around that. So I think this is the kind of answer that I want to give. We're not, again, like, this is 150 pages of book. So we're not doing most of the theory work. We are only saying the part that we think is new, that is not being said, at least in written format, although people seem to be mentioning it. So we are kind of harvesting. So there's an interesting thing. When a lot of people say, actually, this is like, now that we're coming to the end, I think this is the thing I want to say. The long haul. There is the kind of transformative strategy that we want to establish, the vision we want to have. It's for the long term, right? Nobody thinks we're gonna achieve that in like a couple of months or years or something. But then everybody's talking about it as in future. Like there are so many things to do. We think about long term in a reverted fashion. We're like, this is the end of a long-term project that was launched like centuries ago. So understanding that we are kind of at the final edge of a long-term project, it means that we have to learn from all of that, keep that in mind, and like hold with us parts that are still relevant, leave parts that are not relevant, but like get the learning, get the lessons from it, kind of rise on top of all that experience, right? All the history that we have, and not just cherry pick one or two. Like this guy said this, it worked in whatever place 120 years ago, therefore I'm going to do that. But more like, yeah, that happened, it worked, I'm going to keep that, but I'm also going to keep this one and this one, and be open and curious about all of that, and seeing long term not as something like, this is the beginning and I'm going to go forward for whatever decades long of social revolution, but more like, there is a social revolution project that was launched like several centuries ago, and we are at the end of it. So we are the products of it, and we are the successes of that, and taking our position from that viewpoint. I think this is one of the most important things that we are trying to say in the book without saying it. And I think this is what I wanted to share. Mariana, do you want to add something, or?
Maybe just and thank you for that. That was really good. But I think like, so go much more less abstract, let's say, like this, for some people that are in the room that might want that, and to answer a little bit one of the questions that I also saw in the chat. One of the things that we are saying, like, really clear is like end fossil fuel until 2030 at the North Global, right? And that by itself, in our analysis, means like dismantling capitalism by several reasons. But then there is the whole, like there is so many things that can be happening, and that only when we are, like when it's really difficult for you to understand exactly what is going to, like when you do this change like that, exactly how is the new context that you will be in. So that's something that we will have to, like to keep exploring and navigating on and adapting to it and go on, knowing that in the end, what we are aiming for, it's to live in a place where nobody is afraid to be attacked. In like there is no violence in that sense, like we are not afraid to have being attacked, any kinds of that. So I'm just like giving some, like a little bit more I would say clear, more specific thing. I hope that supports some people, although I really liked also like Sinan's approach, but I do think that people sometimes have different kinds of approaches. And yeah, I want to really reinforce that, of course, one of the things that we have as a basics is like end of fossil fuel, because somebody was like raising that. And since, like you're coming from climate justice movement and we're in scientist rebellion, sometimes we don't say this kind of stuff, but it's also nice to say out loud sometimes so that we have that clear. So yeah, it was really nice to be here. Back to you, Fabian.
Very good. Thank you, Sinan, Mariana, for these beautiful words at the end. And thank you for writing this really, really thought-provoking and timely and just great book. I highly recommend people get it. Now we'll shift to Aitskoa, who'll talk for a couple of minutes on what Scientist Rebellion is up to, and then we'll leave it for tonight. And let's go.
So I will try to make this very short because we are already tired, but just a very short introduction to Scientist Rebellion in case, especially if you are a scientist and you want to get involved with us. So yeah, we try to kind of find our place in this ecosystem of movements for systems change. So we are scientists, academics, and people who in some way identify as close to science, that engage primarily in nonviolent civil disobedience to expose the reality and severity of the climate and ecological emergency. And we do it because we think that unless we, who are the best placed to understand the crisis, don't act as if we are in an emergency, then we cannot expect other people to do it. So very briefly, what we are about and our fundamental theory of change, or what that we had when we started, is that we need large parts of society to enter in resistance, to enter in non-cooperation with the system. So we aim to spark this global non-violent climate revolution that we need to do all these deep changes in all parts of society that we need in order to avert the worst of the climate crisis. We have 5 demands or aims. So first of all, science for people and planet. So we are demanding the scientific institutions, academic institutions to put all the resources, refocus all the resources, material and intellectual, towards changing society, building resilience, moving away from this destructive system. We talk about degrowth because we really believe that for a just decarbonization, we need this controlled contraction, democratic contraction of some parts of the economy, especially in the global north, at the same time as improving human well-being and social outcomes. We believe that this needs to be done democratically, so we are advocating for all these changes to be led by citizens' assemblies, people's assemblies, ordinary people getting together to deliberate in the issues in an informed way and lead this decision making. We also believe that beyond decarbonization, we need to move away from the extractivist paradigm where we just consume resources as if this is the only thing that matters, growing the economy instead of securing a well-being for all globally. And we are also in solidarity with all Earth defenders everywhere, and in a time where democratic freedoms are being restricted, we are demanding the release of all nonviolent activists everywhere. Yes, I already said a little bit about this, but we believe that scientists are perfectly placed to wage a rebellion because of the resources that we have, because we are connected internationally. We have these large platforms from which to inform, educate, and rally others, and we I hope at least that we have this implicit authority and legitimacy that is the basis of political power. And what we are currently working on, so we are working on at the international movement level, building organizational capacity. So we need people to help us with equity and conflict resolution, for example, fundraising, and also we need people who can help us shape our global strategy. Also, we have right now an international decentralized campaign around the growth going on. So if you are interested in that, you are also very welcome to contact us. And also we have local chapters who have their own campaigns going on. So we are also very happy to connect you to a group near you.